Welcome to this evening's Voyage of Musical Discovery. This evening we're going to be talking about voices and instruments. We're going to be talking about how composers use voices and instruments to form their compositions and what they do with the various voices and instruments that they have. The string section of the Australian Romantic and Classical Orchestra will be performing for you in the first half, and in the second half we've invited guest ensemble CAMERATA ANTICA to join us. They will be performing music from the 17th century right through to the 21st century with music by Elena Kats-Chernin and Alice Chance. The first piece you're going to be hearing this evening is by a Dutch composer called Johannes Van Bree. Johannes was really fascinated by music of the past, as we are with our orchestra. He was a huge fan of Beethoven's, and he really admired Beethoven's string quartets. Of course, Beethoven is really famous for that genre of music. He wrote this wonderful piece where he took the music of a string quartet and in true romantic, completely over-the-top style, he expanded it into a piece for 4 string quartets. So before the orchestra comes on stage, I'll give you a bit of a glimpse into the things that you can listen out for while they're playing this really interesting piece. He actually works in different ways in this piece. He gives each string quartet its own voice, and you'll hear the string quartets passing a melody between them. There's some fantastic examples of that classic call and response that you'll all have been learning about at school. He also takes one melodic line and he shares that melodic line between the 4 string quartets. So you can hear a theme or a motive moving from single players from each string quartet and then moving back. So it's a visual experience as well as an audible experience. And then again at times he puts all 4 string quartets together to create a unified symphonic sound, if you like. So just be aware of those different movements of sounds and see if you can see and hear where those themes are coming from in this wonderful Allegro for 4 strijkkwartetten, which is Dutch for Allegro for 4 string quartets. Could you please welcome to the stage the string section of the Australian Romantic and Classical Orchestra, directed by Rachael Beesley. and isn't that just a fantastic piece of music? I've really enjoyed listening to my colleagues rehearsing that and performing it this week, and I actually really enjoyed watching you watch that pizzicato tennis going across the stage, a bit like being at Wimbledon, wasn't it? Looking at all the lines being passed back and forth. It's great to see you actually really visually enjoying that as well as listening. I asked Rachael if she'd stay on stage now during this time to talk to us a little bit about historically informed performance violin technique and how we're going to be using that now in the romantic music that you're going to be hearing in the next piece.
Thanks, Nicole, and welcome everybody. It's really beautiful for us to be performing this repertoire in this hall for all of you. And the chamber music element of that piece is just extraordinary, isn't it? Going from 1-string quartet to 4-string quartets. And I think it's that style of the Romantic period where everything just goes a little bit more crazy and a little bit more expressive than what we've had in the earlier periods. And especially in string playing, what we find is that there's a lot of development in the technique and a lot of development in the expressive devices. Now, how do we find that out? How do we know what was going on in the past? Well, there are certain ways we can look at books and we can read the music, but I think we've got to be almost like investigative journalists, or we've got to kind of really get into the music and find as much as we can. And one of those ways is to listen to early recordings. How many of you have listened to early recordings from the beginning of the 20th century, so the 1900s, early 1900s? Yeah, we've got a few hands up there. Yes. And what do you find about those early recordings? Anyone got some ideas? What are you listening when you hear those performers from that early 20th century? What strikes you as different about the way they play to the way we play now, generally in modern music? One of the things that they do is they play around with the tempo a lot. So you've got a lot of tempo rubato, a lot of variation in tempo, and you've also got, especially in string playing, they started to use quite a lot of vibrato, quite expressive vibrato, and they used to use this technique, which we don't hear so much anymore. Here we go. Does anyone know what that's called when you play that in string tank?
Someone who's not a string player, maybe.
Yes, I know, he's a string player, yes. Non-string players? Glissando, yes. Are there other words for that? Yes? Portamento. And the word portamento in Italian means carry the note. And if you think about it, the singers, so the vocalists of the time, they wanted to make the audience really feel the expression as strongly as they could. And they used this effect, this portamento effect, glissando effect of sliding between one note and the next. And it's gone a bit out of fashion, because we don't actually hear it that much. And I can tell you one of the main reasons that's happened is actually because of the recording industry. So now when all edits are made on recordings, it's very difficult to edit a portamento. So just think about that. When you're listening to a recording which is made nowadays, it will very rarely have these portamenti, unless it's a really live recording, because it's almost impossible to cut a portamento in half. So we're really trying to explore that, and we're spending this wonderful week of exploration looking at all of these different techniques and bringing that back into the music of the 19th century.
Great.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Rachael, for that explanation. You're going to be hearing a lot of that slipping and sliding around the violins and cellos and things in this next piece. The orchestra is going to continue with a work by Edvard Grieg. Grieg is a very, very famous Norwegian composer from the Romantic period. In fact, he was very famous and well respected in his own lifetime, as much as he is now. That's not always the case. Sometimes they were famous now, they're not famous. They were famous then, they're not famous now, or vice versa. But Grieg was really very, very popular in his time. In fact, Rachael and I were debating this week, what is the most famous piece of music by Grieg? Have you guys played very much Grieg yet? What pops into your mind when you hear the name Grieg? Any ideas? Yes? In the Hall of the Mountain King. That's what I said. And Rachael said, no, the piano concerto, hands down. So he's very famous. He's most known for In the Hall of the Mountain King from Peer Gynt and for his fabulous piano concerto. Even people who are not classical music concert goers, if you sing those melodies, they'll go, yeah, I know that one. So that's how famous he is. So the orchestra is going to join us back on the stage again in a moment, and they're going to be performing a piece called Elegiac Melody. There are 2 elegiac melodies, and Grieg was very influenced in his lifetime by poetry. In fact, a lot of the Romantic composers were very influenced by poetry, and Grieg took this poem by a fellow Norwegian of his called Finje, and he took the words of the poem and he set that to music for voice and piano. And then he liked his piece so much, he expanded it and arranged it for an entire string orchestra. And that's the version that we're going to be hearing this evening. So I just wanted to point out to you that that's something that you can also experiment with when you're working on your own compositions. There's no reason you can't take a song by Pink or Ed Sheeran and make your own arrangement of that. These days, of course, that's called making a cover. And you could transcribe one of your favorite songs for saxophone quartet, for example, and why not go completely over the top like Van Bree did and expand that into a piece for 4 saxophone quartets. So I wish when I was your age that someone had given me tips and ideas like that for my HSC composition, because I had no ideas at all. But I didn't have a Voyage of Musical Discovery to help me, so there you go. So we're going to go on now with this Elegiac Melody by Grieg. Would you welcome back to the stage the Australian Romantic and Classical Orchestra. The piece that they're going to play, my Dutch is great earlier in the program because I did live there for almost 20 years. My Norwegian's a bit rusty, but I think it's pronounced something like hjertesår, which means the wounded heart. Please enjoy.
So, has anyone out there ever had their heart broken? This piece is really called The Wounded Heart because it speaks of that suffering that happens when someone is struggling. And it has this beauty about it, which Grieg was very specialised at writing these miniature, almost like miniature worlds. And he wrote this song to describe the effect of this suffering, but also to say that you can survive. And I survive. It's going to be okay. My faith is not destroyed. And he really took these words and wrote beautiful melodies with it, which is what we're really inspiring you to do today. And what he did, which Nicole was talking about, transcribing the music or writing your own cover of the version, he did of his own song. So we're going to hear that today, what I'd love you to listen for is the language that he gives to the strings. So we don't have text, but we have the ability to still speak the music. So we're going to start by listening to the lyrics, so the beginning of the song, which is played by the first violins. So did you hear that transition between the minor and the major halfway through the melody? He allows us to feel that the faith has not been destroyed. So he starts off with this melody. Now, originally there was a piano playing the accompaniment. So he had to work out how to transcribe that for the string orchestra. Normally a string orchestra is just divided into the 4 parts, the first, second, viola and cello. But he wrote it so that the first violin part's divided into 2 parts, second violin part is divided, the violas are divided, and we have a cello part and a bass part. So he's actually come up with a very rich texture that he can work with. At the beginning though, it's quite simple, and so together with that melody we have the bass line. But let's hear, where is the bass line in this music? Okay, so who can tell me who was playing the bass line then? The second violins, but which part of the second violins? The lower part, so the lower part of the second violin. So let's hear that. Actually, can we hear something? Something's really sort of missing in the middle of this, isn't it? So we've got the bass line and the melody, we need the harmony. So let's have a listen to the harmony. So we weren't playing that time, but who else wasn't playing? Double bass. Now how does that feel when the bass line is not in the bass? So you've got this sensation of a high bass line. That's a really beautiful thing to do. It's a little bit to do with this feeling of suffering, that your heart is, your breath is a bit high because you're suffering. So you imagine that he put that bass line so high so that we would feel that emotion. So let's hear it all together. So what did Grieg do next? Verse 2. So where do you go from there? Well, he introduces a very special motive. Let's listen to that. What was that? What did that sound like? That's the heart, isn't it? But it's not a happy heart, it's a wounded heart. So it has that dissonance as soon as the violas come in, all on those 4 different parts. So we get this really, really explicit sort of demonstration of the motive and how to make that really special. But he waited until the second verse to bring it in. Didn't just introduce the idea straight away, oh, here's all my ideas at once. Second verse. So let's hear who's got the melody now. The bass has come in, so our bass player has come in, but how is she playing? What was that? Plucking, so pizzicato, so she was using the pizzicato effect. So it's not the full resonance of the bass, it's just sort of a hint of the sound coming through. Now, this is where this moment of really tumultuous passion comes in the third verse, and I think we just need to listen to see who's got the melody in the third verse. Okay, so was that the melody? If it wasn't the melody, then what was it? Counter melody, yes, I'm hearing that. So the contra melody, the other side of the melody. And it's almost as in contrapuntal sort of writing or a counterpoint to the melody. So we've got this feeling of tension and really full passion, full dynamic coming in. And now to make the effect even greater, he's done something very special with the violins. Who of you were here in our March program where we did Beethoven Symphony? Hands up who was listening to that. Now, do you remember Mr. Gill talking about what happens when you put the violins in octaves? Can you remember that, where we played the outside octave and then we took away the under octave and somehow it wasn't as powerful? Well, Grieg took that idea, and all great composers actually take that idea of writing a melody in octaves. So let's hear the violins and see what happens when they're playing in octaves. So you hear that powerful effect that you get from those octaves. So I think let's listen to all three verses now. So we've got this real sort of integrity in the line at the beginning. The melodic line remains the same throughout. So you could be singing the words to the text all the way throughout, but he treats them in the three very different ways. The first way, what was that? The simple way with the very high bass line. The second way, where we had that throbbing heartbeat. and the last one with the octaves and the really dramatic counter melody coming from the basses. And I think bringing that all back to the very beginning of the heartbroken feeling, we think of all the technical ways of writing a piece and how we can construct it, but in the end it has to move the audience. It has to move the musicians who can then affect the audience. So we really use all of these ideas to bring it back to the emotion. So we hope you enjoy our performance now of The Wounded Heart by Grieg.
Thank you very much, everybody. That was beautiful, really exquisite music, isn't it? I would like to invite two people to join me on stage now, though. That's Matt Manchester. You met him earlier this evening leading the singing. And Christina Leonard, very well-known saxophone face around Sydney. Matthew is the artistic director, together with Anna, of CAMERATA Antica. and Christina is the soprano saxophonist from that ensemble. And I wanted to ask Matt and Christina if you could talk to us a little bit about the instruments that you've brought on stage with you just now, and how those instruments, what their role is in your ensemble and how that works.
Thanks very much, Nicole. This project started, well, the ensemble started many, many years ago in London when Anna and I wanted to explore the connection between this instrument here and the voice. So I guess we should start with this instrument. Who's never seen one of these before? Cool. This is a cornetto. This is the most important soprano instrument for about, let's say 1450 to 1650, 1700, until violins came along and stole all our jobs. The violinists were able to play longer phrases, leap faster than we were, and also a lot of the players and makers died in the plague in the mid-1600s in Venice, which is a bit of a shame for the cornetto. It didn't become another instrument, it just died out completely. Now, one of the things the cornetto is supposed to do is emulate the human voice. If you're playing an instrument from this time, and especially this one, you're sounding like a human voice. In fact, there's a beautiful description that says the cornetto, I love this one, especially when I'm standing next to Christina, the cornetto is the most excellent of wind instruments because it most closely resembles the human voice. And my other favourite quote about it is that it sounds like a choice castrato in a choir. And I'll leave you with that thought. Christina and I met some years ago playing a concert, and we were asked to play a duet. Maybe, Christina, you'd like to chat about that a little bit.
Well, I think it was Paul Dyer's idea to bring us both together, because he heard me playing and he said, goodness, this is a remarkable similarity between the sounds. And so he kind of threw us together, and Matt brought some music over to my place. And I was really taken with what Paul said, which was the commonality in the sound. And it was very, very interesting to me, because my ears were wide open to all of this beautiful Baroque ornamentation and the actual sound world of this cornetto. And the more we played together, the more I kind of moved my sound around to match Matt's. And I was thinking about it just a little minute ago, and it's almost like you're in a foreign country for a little while, and you start to pick up a bit of an accent, and you start speaking in the accent, and you kind of start melding into this sound world. And when that is married with voice, there's this cross-pollination of sound across the three instruments, and it really highlights that if you think something is going to work, it probably will. But even if you think that it can't possibly, well, you should probably try it anyway, because it could pleasantly surprise you, because of the ability of instruments to be able to manipulate their sounds and take on the accent of something else.
Absolutely. So we'll play a little phrase for you now on both instruments. This is from the first duet that we ever played together. Just keep in mind, the cornetto is a kind of weird hybrid between wind and brass, right? So I have 6 holes on top there and 1 below for the thumb. It's a bit like a Renaissance recorder without the pinky hole. But I don't blow across a fipple. There's no reed. I buzz like a trumpet mouthpiece, but this mouthpiece, which is made of horn, is about the size of an acorn. So it's a completely different way of blowing from the trumpet. I was originally a trumpet player, and this took a lot of getting used to and a couple of years of sounding like a squished duck. My poor wife having to sit through that. Thank goodness she stuck with it, and now I can play. So this is a piece by Cazzati, this main theme. How about you serve an overture? So you can hear there's quite a lot of similarity between those two sounds, and they're both quite vocal and flexible sounds. And so one of the things we're trying to do with this project and the pieces we'll play you tonight is emulate the human voice. So if you occasionally lose track of where it's a voice and where it's an instrument, we're doing our job right. It certainly is something you should try in your own composing, in your own playing. I'm firmly of the opinion that if you're playing like a singer, you'll play more musically than if you're just playing the notes on the page.
Absolutely. Well, I think the stage is set for us now, so would like to welcome CAMERATA ANTICA to the stage, and I'm going to ask Matt to take over and talk to you a little bit about the Monteverdi and perhaps some things that you can listen for while they perform the first piece for you. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks very much. Hopefully my musicians will be arriving on stage any moment now. You don't need to clap them, you can clap them at the end, that's fine. One of the instruments we're going to talk about a little bit later is just going to tune while we chat as well, so you can ignore that. So, our first piece is by Claudio Monteverdi. Monteverdi is the most important composer nobody's ever heard of. He was the guy who ushered in what became opera. He was a master of changing the old style of polyphonic writing into the new style of monodic writing, where you have a bass line and a melodic line over the top. And this particular piece is from his 8th book of madrigals. He wrote 8 books of madrigals over his life. This is when he really found his stride. He was very good at what he was doing.
Matt, can I interrupt and ask, may I ask, by interrupting? Cool.
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
A madrigal is a piece for instruments and voices, usually just basso continuo. Students, hand up if you know what a basso continuo is. Excellent. If you don't, go home and look it up. No, I should tell you about that. It's a single bass line that has improvisation in keyboard or plucked instruments over the top. What's really important about this is Monteverdi himself said the text is the master of the music. So the music has to submit to the text. It has to do something that helps bring out the text in any piece that he writes. So I'll just tell you the text. It's in Italian, and in English it vaguely translates as, "Little bird, how gentle you are. My being in love is like your state. You are in captivity, I'm in captivity. You sing for the one who has bound you in captivity, and I sing for her as well. But we are different in this. You live to sing, while I, singing, die." So this piece, in this piece, it's written for 2 sopranos, and as I said, the cornetto can be a voice. In this case, I will be playing the part of the bird, and Anna will be playing the part of the jilted lover. And you'll hear a lot of interplay between these 2 parts, and my part trying to sound a little bit like a bird. But it's more than word painting. What Monteverdi's trying to do here is bring out the meaning of the text, rather than just pictures that the text might draw for you. And there are just 2 little things to listen for. One little thing to listen for, really, and that's improvisation. Because we have a basso continuo part here, the written bass line is played on the gamba, and everything that Anthony plays on the harpsichord is completely improvised. So it changes every time we play it. We never know exactly how it's going to be, and he's constantly thinking of ways to bring out the meaning of the words in what he's playing underneath. It's a really great example of improvisation in performance. It's kind of like jazz, actually. And the other sort of improvisation you'll hear is improvisation that Anna and I are doing. So if we have a line that goes something like this, at a cadence, there's absolutely no way someone playing this music would ever just play those 2 notes. We always ornament at a cadence, and often before. So listen out as we play through for all the improvisation that you'll hear in the harpsichord part, and improvisation in the 2 soprano parts as well. So this is O come sei gentile by Monteverdi.
very much. Really a very exquisite sound, isn't it? The cornetto, I think. I'm glad that we invited CAMERATA ANTICA to come, see when I can see how many people in this audience this evening have never heard a cornetto before, so that's fabulous. The following piece on the program this evening involves Christina back on stage with her soprano saxophone. It's written by Elena Kats-Chernin, undoubtedly one of Australia's most well-known composers at this moment. And that's a really interesting thing for me for this group. We have 17th century instruments, harpsichord and cornetto, yet they're commissioning works with modern composers from today, and I find that a really exciting adventure that you guys are on with that, so congratulations. Matt was telling me a little bit of an anecdote about this piece, Black Tie, how it originated, Elena's original version, and how it's evolved into the version that you're going to be hearing this evening. So would you like to share that story with everyone, Matt?
Sure, thank you. So in 2015, Christina and Anna and I and the rest of the group got together and commissioned these two new works you're about to listen to. Christina's good friends with Elena and was our sort of point of contact there. We commissioned her to write a piece for us, and we had a lovely afternoon playing music at her house so she could get an idea of what these two instruments sounded like together. She wrote a wonderful sketch of the piece just on two piano staves that she'd obviously worked out on her piano at home, and promptly hurt her back and was in the middle of composing an opera at the time, laying flat on her back. She was unable to meet the deadline we needed to get this piece recorded and performed. So I finished it, which is a daunting task when you have her sketch. So I came up with an arrangement for the group that I thought worked really well with the colours, and we recorded it and we performed it. 3 years later, in fact, last Wednesday, Christina called me and said, "Hey, I've got some notes from Elena on the piece that we're going to do next week." And I'm going, "Oh no, it's 3 years later, we've recorded it, it's all done." And so we worked our way through Elena's scrawl on the piece of the original score that I provided and came up with a new version. So you're actually hearing this piece for the very first time. It's never been heard the way Elena wanted to hear it before tonight. She added some counter melodies, she changed the voicing of some chords, and I guess the point is here, students, that the collaborative process in composition is really important, but also the compositional process doesn't end when you submit something. In fact, if you're a composer and you're writing a piece of music, get your drafts in early, even if they're rubbish, even if you don't think there's much there to say. Get something in and then change it. Don't wait until this finished product appears before you, because even the greatest composers, Elena, and many, many others, don't do that. Have a look at Bach's works. So many times he reused bits from other pieces or made changes depending on which performance was happening. So it's really important that you see composition as a continuum and not a destination. And this is a really great example of that happening before you. There's a couple of interesting things to listen to in this piece. The first is that the voice is used like an instrument rather than instruments being used like a voice. So there are no words written, as in many of the Kats-Chernin pieces you might have heard. Anna is improvising the syllables that she sings to match the mood of the music. So it's never the same twice when she sings this. And it's all about mood and sound and connecting with the other instruments. Structurally, here we go, structure, ready? Here's one of your concepts. It's a very, very simple structured piece. It has 4 themes. So the first theme goes like this. Doesn't go like that, it goes like this. That's the first theme. The second theme happens in the soprano sax. The third theme is shared around amongst the instruments, but I think one of the most beautiful combinations, as I would, is the cornetto and the voice. So we'll play the third theme. There's our third theme. And our fourth theme belongs entirely to the soprano. So it's a very simple piece, 4 very beautiful, simple themes. Sounds a little bit early 20th century, maybe from a salon in London, people waltzing around, as you'll hear when we put it all together in a moment. There's one more thing I'd like to bring to your attention, and that's the use of silence. There are 2 really poignant moments of silence in this, and I think silence is just as effective, if not more effective, than notes. It can really propel the rhythmic impetus of the piece along, and you'll hear that does that in these 2 spots. One of them is right in the middle, and you'll feel the piece lift up in the air and wait, and then fall down again. And the last one is before the final note. I want you to really think about how important silence is and how you can use this, students, in your own compositions. Don't be afraid of leaving bits of page blank. It's really, really effective. So, for the first time ever, the way the composer wanted to hear it, this is Black Tie by Elena Kats-Chernin.
Structured piece of music, and very simple concept to the structure, actually. Short and sweet, bit fluffy. It took me back, it feels like about 100 years ago. In fact, it made me think of the Titanic for some reason, so but with a happy ending. Yes. No, not that bit, before the sinking bit. The final work on this evening's program is by Alice Chance. Alice is another female Australian composer. She's from Sydney, she's in her 20s, she just lives down the road, and she's composing some fabulous music. She's written a musical, lots of instrumental music, choral works as well. And she also, as well as being a composer, she plays the Viola da Gamba. And I'm going to ask Laura if she will hold up her Viola da Gamba. Matt referred to that before as the Gamba. We call it a Gamba for short. Now, how many people in the audience have not seen a Viola da Gamba before? Great. We've got 2 brand new instruments for you this evening. The Viola da Gamba has 7 strings. You might think it looks a little bit like a cello, but hopefully you've noticed that it's got a really unique sound, quite different to a cello. There are 7 strings and it has frets, like a guitar does. And you may have also noticed, if you were paying attention, that Laura holds her bow with an underhand bow. That's a Viola da Gamba bow style, as opposed to the cellists who hold their bow on the top in a completely different style. And although it is a string instrument, it's not actually a member of the violin or the cello family at all. It's a whole breed of its own. It's called the viol family, and it was a really important string instrument family in the 16th and 17th century. So there's a fabulous repertoire for solo Viola da Gamba. So if you're online, you should check that out. It's really beautiful, beautiful music. I wanted to point out actually that it's very interesting that Alice writes for the Viola da Gamba because she is a Viola da Gamba player, and that's really a very wise thing to do if you're going to be venturing into composition. Write for something that you know. It's probably not a great idea to write a piece for the bagpipes if you don't play them and you don't know how it works. It's going to be difficult for you, it's going to be difficult for the bagpipe player, unless of course you have a friend who plays the bagpipes and they can tell you all about it. For example, Mozart, he was best friends with a clarinet player. So he didn't play the clarinet, but the reason I'm a clarinet player, the reason we have the Mozart clarinet concerto and the Mozart clarinet quintet was because he worked together with his friend. But really the moral of the story is just compose for something that you know, and it will make everyone's life a lot easier. Right. So we're going to carry on now with Ode on Melancholy by Alice Chance, and Matt's going to tell us a little bit about it.
Thanks. So the way that Alice has set the text, well, I suppose I should talk about the text first, shouldn't I? The text is by Keats. It's Ode on Melancholy. It's a very 19th century poem full of pathos and melancholy and lost love and death and mortality, the usual themes. Alice has set the words, even though they're 19th century words set by a 21st century composer, she set them in a way that would not be unfamiliar to Monteverdi. It's really incredibly clever what she's done. She's brought out the mood of the words by the way the instruments interact with the voice. This is not just simple word painting. So it's not when we talk about a tree, we hear some tree-like things, or a bird, we hear a bird-like thing. This is about meaning behind the text. And I want you to really concentrate on the words that you're hearing, and the text and how the stanzas tie together and what the music's doing behind that. And when you really focus in on that, it's extraordinarily beautiful writing and very simple what Alice has done here. The poem itself has 3 stanzas, and each of these is a short movement. So you'll hear 3 short movements when we play today. I'll just run you through them. Thematically, the first movement starts off with this beautiful drifting, wafting, overlapping theme that sounds like this. That's all there is to it, really. Everything else is drawn out of those first few notes. It also is in a minor key at the beginning, and that's important later, so remember that. Once the introduction's finished with that melody that draws you into the mood of the piece, the first couple of words are very clearly declaimed by the singer with chords underneath in the instruments. And then there's some really amazing word setting. So there's a line that says, and bear with me in my 19th century English, "Nor let the beetle or the death moth be your mournful psyche." That's a pretty dark line, if you think about it. The original theme is pulled to pieces, stretched out, and then there are little tiny moments of ornamentation that are thrown into the harpsichord and the gamba part that sound like the death moth. It sounds like a moth fluttering. We're just going to play a couple of bars of this for you. So there's our first movement. The second movement changes mood utterly. It begins in a kind of frenzied, mad way. But there's a huge contrast. So you'll hear the frenzied mad in just a moment. The text ends, though, at the end of this second stanza with the line, "If thy mistress rich anger shows, imprison her soft hand, and let her rage, and feed deep upon her peerless eyes." It's as if in the text the world falls away and the lover is just looking at the person they love and holding their hand, and it doesn't matter that there's all of this anger and rage and death and depression around them. It's just about their eyes, and you can hear that in the music. So I want you to listen to that when we play. We'll just play the frenzied bit for you so you get a sense of that first.
But when the melancholy picture falls, sudden from heaven like a weeping cloud, that fostered the drawn and flower, and hides the April shroud.
Which brings us to the final movement. This whole final movement is based around 3 bars of very simple chords. Now, the first time you hear the chords, they come in on the second beat of the bar. So there's a bass note in the gamba, and then the winds play with, weirdly, a soprano instrument playing the bass note. There's an interesting idea. And these chords are a little bit offbeat, a little bit off-center. They don't feel like there's a resolution yet. We'll play those for you, and then I'll explain the rest of the movement.
She's rose in beauty, beauty that must die.
Following that, slightly off-center feeling chord. We go through the rest of the verse, and then at the end, the chords come back again, but this time they're on the beat. The bass line changes, the harmony changes, and it feels more resolute. So I want you to listen for those chords and the way that they're deconstructed and reconstructed throughout the movement. And we finish, finally, with this sense of acceptance that maybe the world is a bit depressing and dark at times. And there's something really beautiful about the ending. In fact, I personally think the ending of this third movement is one of the most beautiful things I've ever played. It's astonishing what Alice has done with it. So, let's go on a journey into 19th century melancholy. This is Ode on Melancholy by Alice Chance.
hearts to